Table this week, Dale Butland, Communications Director for Innovation Ohio, a progressive think tank, and Republican analyst Terry Casey. We are once again taking a look at that fiscal cliff. And here we are, farther into December, and it doesn't seem like anybody's ready to blink yet. What do you predict is going to be happening in the days ahead?
Well, in some ways, the fiscal cliff was a little bit of an artificial deadline set a number of months back as an idea that the White House had to make it seem like there'd be teeth to force a settlement. Obviously, there's no technical reason the government doesn't run out of money on January 10th or January 20th. But
our taxes could go up.
Well,
correct?
that's the club that the president has to try and force Republicans do what I want, including giving me an unwritten or an unlimited blank check to keep running up more and more debt, because he doesn't want Congress to ever have any say in whether or not we increase the debt limit.
Is it an artificial club, Dale, or is this something that we should legitimately be worried about?
It's not an artificial club. All of the Bush tax cuts expire on December 31st of this year. That's the reality. And there will be a huge tax increase on everybody if that occurs. But let me say, Colleen, I don't think it's a matter of who blinks first. I think the question is whether the Republican leadership and the Republican Party generally is going to respect the election results and do what every single public opinion poll over the last 2 years has said they want to have happen, which is tax rates going up on the richest 2% of Americans.
But all of those opinion polls also show that people want the government to get a handle on spending. Yeah. People are really concerned about the debt and what appears to be out of control spending coming out of Washington. So don't we need to do both things? Of
course we do. In fact, the president has said repeatedly that we need a balanced plan. It's going to require some tax increases on the top 2%, and it have to include budget cuts as well. But here's the point. If you don't have sufficient revenue, then that means that the programs that middle-class people and lower-income people depend on will have to be cut even more. So it's got to be a balanced plan. The president wants to raise $1 trillion in new tax revenue, and he wants to do it again by Colleen, let me just say this, because this is important. Nobody's talking about soaking the rich, all right? Everybody, rich, middle class, lower income, everybody gets a tax cut on the first $250,000 that they earn a year. Everybody does. It's only on income over that $250,000 that the Clinton-era tax rates would kick in. But for the Republicans, that's not good enough. They're holding tax cuts for the 98% hostage because they want the rich folks to get a bonus tax cut above and beyond what everybody else is getting.
Well, the problem is the president's gone from wanting $800 billion more in higher taxes to $1.6 trillion, so he's doubled the amount in higher taxes he wants. And Dale said earlier, well, the president won the election. There's nothing in the Constitution that says whichever person wins the presidency automatically gets all their wishes rubber stamped from Congress. It doesn't happen that way. It's two co-equal branches of government. They need to work together. And unfortunately, the president hasn't really spent much time one-on-one, personally, talking to members of Congress, learning their concerns, their issues.
Do you think that as we look at the tenor in Washington, because soon after the election, both sides were pointing the finger at each other again, as you're listening to this, who's going to give in? What should we do to make somebody accept that they're not going to get 100% of their plan?
First of all, Colleen, it's not a matter of people giving in, because if there's not an agreement, if the Republicans will not compromise on the tax rates for the top 2%, everybody's tax cut expires on December 31st. Well, what that means is all the tax cuts are gone at that point, including for the rich. The first week in January, the new Congress will come into session. The first bill the Democrats will introduce will be to restore the tax cuts for everybody earning under $250,000 a year for the 98%. Can the Republicans vote against that? Of course not. So people will have their tax cuts restored. The only question is it going to be before December 31st? Are we going to get an agreement, or will it be after?
Well, and the reality...
So practically then, should we even be as concerned as we all are? Everybody's talking about this fiscal cliff. Should we even care about it if it's that easy for them to do it?
I said earlier, and that's the reason why, if they don't get it done in December, which hopefully they will, they still have January, because the reality for most taxpayers, the key deadline is April 15th. Now, it gets a little complicated because IRS has got to print up tax forms and tell people which rates, but they can adjust things. There's the internet. So, yes, there's the deadline of December 31st, but there's also the month of January where they can get things fixed.
Everybody wants compromise, Colleen. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Everyone expects the president and the Congress to work together. But here's the reality. There was no more defining issue in this last campaign than the issue of taxes. President Obama explicitly campaigned on raising taxes for the top 2%. Mitt Romney was just as explicit in saying, no, we shouldn't. We should raise the revenue we need through deductions and loophole closing. So, what's the Republican compromise? The Republican compromise is to ask the guy who won the election to adopt the loser's campaign platform. That's not much of a compromise.
But there were also a number of people who returned to Congress on their platform, and their platform was that they're not going to raise the taxes on the wealthy. I mean, so maybe they feel like their answer or their obligations to their constituents are to stick by what they promised, which is to go after those entitlement programs.
And remember, the wealthy part is $82 billion a year. The problem is $1.1 trillion in deficit spending every year, year after year after year after year. So $82 billion doesn't solve a $1.1 trillion problem.
Do you think that they're also going to maybe before the end of this term reach some kind of a compromise on the filibuster? Because that's one thing that everyone pointed to as holding up progress when someone in the Senate can basically send down a form that says, I'm going to filibuster this bill. They don't even have to go down and do it. Should they be able to block legislation the way that they have through the first term for Barack Obama by simply filibustering bills that they don't like?
I spent 20 years of my life working in the U.S. Senate. And I can tell you that the Senate as an institution is broken. It's completely dysfunctional. Used to be, in the old days, the filibuster was used very sparingly, only in extreme circumstances. 80% of the major legislation that has come to the Senate since President Obama's come to office has been filibustered. We can't even start debate now on things because they threaten that. I think most people would be shocked to learn. It's not like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where the guy stands up on the floor and talks for days and nights on end. Now it's just the threat of a filibuster. Well, we think we're going to filibuster. That is enough to stop everything.
Should they change it, Terry? I mean, do you think they might before the end of the year?
Well, the threat of a filibuster is probably been used too much, and in fact there's a lot of quotes out there on the internet and other places of Barack Obama, a lot of Democrats when Republicans were in control, when they said those Republicans better not change our right to filibuster. So there's been Democrats who supported the filibuster when they weren't in control, but I think there's some ways of tightening it down so it's not abused as much, but to totally do away with it, that would cause an explosion.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's talking about doing away with it. All they're talking about is reforming it so that, number one, you can't stop debate from even starting on a procedural vote. Number two, if you're going to filibuster, and I think this is perfectly reasonable, if you're going to shut down the business of the country, then you ought to have to stand on the floor of the Senate day after day and read out of cookbooks or whatever it is you're going to do, right? And let the people of the country see what you're doing. I think that would solve a lot of this.
Before we run out of time, I want to quickly switch to the State House. And while you're talking about whether or not Democrats and Republicans can reach agreement, there is talk here in Ohio about maybe some kind of an agreement on the way we redistrict the congressional and the legislative districts in the future. Is that something you think that might actually be coming out of the State House this year?
Well, I think there's agreement in the Senate on some general concepts, including making sure that it's truly a bipartisan plan. So in the Senate, there's agreement that way. Bill Batchelder in the House, the Speaker, has a little different idea of how it might be done, and then there are some differences of opinion, including people outside the legislature. Some want it to happen right now. Other people say, let's start it and make it effective in 2022 rather than in the middle of the census cycle.
But it just started. I mean, wouldn't you like to see something done if they're going to do it while everybody has kind of a calmer head? Dale, maybe should they not be looking at it right now and taking a look at what 10 years from now Ohio could do?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, this is the kind of working together that I think people want to see. We have Senator Faber, a Republican, Senator Turner, a Democrat, working together, coming up with a plan that they can both agree on. I think this is the kind of thing people want. Clearly, the system we have is not very good. We have a situation now in our state, as we all know, where more people voted for Democratic candidates for Congress, for example, than voted for Republican candidates for Congress, and yet the new Congress will be 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats. In the Ohio House, it's the same thing. You had more people vote for Democratic candidates for the Ohio House, but thanks to this gerrymandering, there will be 60 Republican members and 39 Democrats. So clearly this is not fair, and people who are casting these votes deserve representation, and they're really not getting it right now.
We have just a few seconds. Any final thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of other factors on Dale cited why there's some differences, and in fact, they haven't even counted all the votes, including provisionals and other official counts in the totals, and there's differences sometimes because some candidates are unopposed, so when you add them up as Dale did, that's not exactly the whole picture, but I think there's a chance for some progress, and time will tell, but I think we're a lot closer than being too far apart.
Well, we like that word progress.
Yes.
And cooperation, and we will be right back.